trying to tell me Giannis wouldn't be able to play an NBA game in the 70s?
I think
he wouldn't be able to do it.
Giannis,
neither would you. Neither would you.
Giannis Antetokounmpo would have 250 points in a game in the 70s. 250.
Is that Kuzi? When was Kuzi playing?
Kuzi, I feel like they were cueing you.
I think so.
Brian Windhorst's back here with us. Doggy, do you agree that Giannis would have dominated if he played in the 70s?
Well, I'll say this to LeBron. Has he heard of Julius Erving? Okay. Giannis is not as good as Julius Erving. Did Julius Erving, who played in the 70s, was on the Sixers in the 70s? Do you think that Julius Erving scored 250 points in a quote-unquote game or averaged 50 a game? To sit there and embarrass the guys who played in the 70s? Bill Walton? Kareem? Are you all these great centers? Are you nuts? Giannis is a great player. Nobody's going to say he's not a great player. But don't sit there and say that this is ridiculous to compare him that he's so much better than anybody in the 70s, because he's not.
A fourth straight year, multiple-time defensive player of the year. The dude is a gazelle. The brother is special, and there's no doubt about that. Now, back in the 70s, he would have got knocked on his ass a lot more. He would have been asked to go to the free throw line a lot more. He would have been extraordinarily exposed for his deficiency in that department. And obviously that's something that would have hurt him. In the same breath, I get where you're bringing up, and I'm going to educate the viewers on this. I understand why you're bringing up Julius Erving. Julius Erving essentially was a small forward, wasn't even a power forward, certainly wasn't a center. But Julius Erving was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan arrived. That's the doctor that we're talking about of all time at this moment in time. They just wouldn't. You wouldn't say he's top 12 at this moment, okay?
Be a little high.
Not top 15 either. But he's all-time great, no doubt. Let's also understand this, though, Wendy. Here's the problem with what LeBron James did. It's still disrespectful to the previous eras. And there's no call for it.
What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Alex, the best sports capper on YouTube. And we got to talk about this ESPN, LeBron James, Stephen A. beef. And I don't even want, before we even get to the Stephen A. and LeBron James beef, I want to talk about something more important, because if you've been subscribed here for a while, you know I have a real issue with modern sports media and how they like to talk about everything but the game, and how they like to make everything a comparison and do nothing but crap on modern players. And LeBron, who I'm not a huge fan of LeBron, right? But he has expertly trolled sports media, ESPN and Stephen A. Smith with the way he's articulated things throughout this entire debacle. Because he goes on Pat McAfee, as you guys seen before this video started, and he states on the Pat McAfee show that, oh yeah, they're always trying to act like, guys from this era couldn't play in like the 70s and stuff. And if you put Giannis in the 70s, he'd average 250 points. Now, anyone who's not retarded would know that LeBron's obviously being facetious. He's not going to drop 250 points in a game, even though Wilt dropped 100 in the game. So, I mean, it's not 1,000% far-fetched, but yeah, he's not literally saying he's going to drop 250 in the game. What he's saying is there's no one in the 1970s who would be able to do anything with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Feel how you want to feel about Giannis, love your air, but he's not lying. There is no one in the 1970s who would have been able to do anything with Giannis Antetokounmpo. All you have to do is look at Wilt Chamberlain. All right, Wilt Chamberlain was averaging like 40-something points and like 25, almost 30 rebounds a game from the 60s into the mid-70s. Even if you go to just the 70s, because to be fair, I know someone's going to say, well, he's not talking about the 60s, he's talking about the 70s. Okay, so in the 70s, it was the tail end of Wilt Chamberlain's career. He's getting ready to retire, so he's not even at his peak anymore. And still in 1970, Wilt was averaging almost 30 points and almost 30 rebounds, like 18-something rebounds a game. When's the last time you've seen anyone average those types of numbers in the modern era, right? And this was a Wilt Chamberlain who was on his way out. So if Wilt Chamberlain on his way out, 4 years from retirement in 1970, right, could find a way to average about 28 points and 18 rebounds per game, you don't think Giannis Antetokounmpo in his prime, in that same time period, couldn't average at least probably about 45 and 30? You're out of your mind. You're out of your mind, right? Then you have guys like Mad Dog, right? And this is where I talk about the hypocrisy. Because you have guys like Mad Dog. First of all, he brings up a false equivalency because he starts to talk about Julius Erving. Oh, well, Giannis isn't better than Dr. J. It doesn't matter if Giannis is better than Dr. J or not. They don't play the same position. So you automatically can't compare them, right? Because you could argue, right? Well, people would at least argue, right? Between Wilt Chamberlain and Dr. J, there's some people who would argue that Dr. J is better than Wilt Chamberlain, but he would never have the numbers of Wilt Chamberlain because Wilt Chamberlain was 7-1 in an era where that was rare. So it was way easier for him to score and way easier for him to rebound. It required a lot more skill for Dr. J to get the same amount of production as Wilt Chamberlain does. So you shouldn't even be comparing him to Dr. J. All right? But either way, even with the comparison of Dr. J, okay, let's just say Dr. J is better than Giannis. Doesn't change the fact that Giannis would have easily been averaging at least 40-something points and about 30-something boards in the 1970s. The numbers are right there for you to look at. Here's the bigger thing, right? Mad Dog said it. Stephen A. said it. They all said it. This is the big thing that I really want to get into. They said it's disrespectful. Well, you're disrespecting the players of the 70s that act like Giannis could just come in there and dominate. You guys don't do this with modern players all the time? All the time. We'll start talking about how Steph Curry is arguably the best point guard in NBA history, which he has more than enough accolades to be in that conversation. And people will bring up someone like John Stockton. People will tell me, oh, if Steph Curry played in the 90s, he wouldn't have the numbers he has right now. John Stockton had good numbers in the 90s. John Stockton is not better than Steph Curry. The 90s never seen a player like Steph Curry. They would have no idea what to do with a player like Steph Curry. You can't even hard foul Steph Curry because he's shooting from half court. And before you guys said they would have hand checked him, guess who helped get rid of hand checking? Your boy, your king, Michael Jordan. A lot of the rules in basketball that y'all now complain about, y'all say basketball is soft. Y'all realize those came from the Jordan rules? Jordan was getting beat up in the paint by the Pistons. He couldn't get a championship. The NBA wanted Jordan to be the guy, so they made the game purposely more soft. All right, they started making it so that you couldn't camp in the lane as much. They started making it so that hard fouls was going to start getting called flagrants and things like that. They wanted the lane to be open so Jordan could go and do his Air Jordan shit. That started with him. All right, not all of it, but a lot of it started with him and the Jordan rules because he couldn't get past the Pistons. So when you talk about soft, it's interesting to me how that doesn't get brought up. But either way, that's neither here nor there, right? Why, when we're talking about the greatness of Steph Curry, are you even bringing up players from the past to compare him to? Why can't Steph Curry just be great, right? Like when Jordan was playing, Jordan was just considered to be great. No one went and tried to find anyone else to compare Jordan to diminish his greatness, right? When Shaq was considered the most dominant center of all time, we all could have said that there's a strong argument that it could have been Wilt Chamberlain, who had better numbers than Shaq, right? But we didn't do that because back then it was just about appreciating athletes' greatness. So we just called him the most dominant center of all time. Like there was no reason to compare him to Wilt. We wasn't really doing that. Like you would have barbershop conversations where you compare people, sure, but it wasn't every single day on national television topic. And it also wasn't one-sided. The players of today always lose when compared to the players of the past. It's not even just about basketball. It's about football too. A lot of you guys probably heard of Lynn Dawson. He's on the screen right now. This is the Chiefs quarterback from Super Bowl I. Yes, he is smoking a cigarette at halftime. I repeat, he is smoking a cigarette at halftime. Now, people want to tell me today's NFL players are soft and they wouldn't have been able to play back in the days. You're talking about back in the days where a Super Bowl quarterback is smoking a cigarette at halftime? You're trying to tell me, right, that Myles Garrett wouldn't have been tough enough to handle this guy. TJ Watt wouldn't have been tough enough to handle this guy. Aaron Donald wouldn't have been tough enough to handle this guy who's such a tough, great athlete that he's smoking a cigarette at halftime. This is what you guys are trying to tell me. And here's my thing. Obviously, players today are way bigger, way faster, and way stronger than they were in the past. That's not up for debate. It is a fact. That does not make them better, no. But especially when you start to talk about other sports such as football, do you realize there was no such thing as a 275-pound man who could run a 4.5 40 at 6'5" coming off the edge back in the 70s and 80s? Do you guys understand that there was no such thing as that? They didn't have stuff like that. If you let players with the athleticism of today play as reckless as they did back in the days, someone would die on that field. Someone almost died on the field twice. First of all, a lot of the rule changes that you see in the NFL right now came from when Deshaun Jackson, and I believe it was Asante Samuel, but don't quote me on that, but when Deshaun Jackson had that big hit, it might have been dude from the Falcons. I can't remember. Whatever. Deshaun Jackson had that big hit and they both knocked each other out and they stayed down on the field for like 2 commercial breaks. That's what started a lot of the rule changes. Do you guys realize even with all the rule changes, Damar Hamlin still almost died on the field? Athletes are too big, too strong, too fast to just be going around headhunting now. You can't do that anymore, right? But anyways, to go back to the NBA, and I'm only bringing that up just to say that this stuff happens in all sports. The football players go through the same thing, right? You know, like baseball players of today, they all go through the same thing. It's not just that they're being compared to players of the past. It's that no matter what they do, it's diminished. Like, look at Saquon Barkley. When Saquon Barkley went out, and he was about to break Eric Dickerson's record if it wasn't for the fact that the Eagles decided to sit him the last game. People were going through the moon to try to defend Eric Dickerson. Oh, well, you know, Saquon Barkley had an extra game, so it wouldn't count. Seriously? So by that logic, back when the NFL used to only have 12 games, no one who broke a record at 16 games records should count. So let's throw out most of Tom Brady's records. Let's throw out Peyton Manning's records. Let's throw out Brett Favre's records. Let's throw out all those records because they had 4 extra games. Like, you see what I'm saying? This is what I mean when I talk about how people go through the moon to disrespect current athletes. Now you're sitting here talking about 1 game, meaning that a record doesn't count because someone had 1 extra game to do it. Like, this is the stupidest thing. Again, by that logic, when you got to go back to whenever the league had its lowest amount of games and only count the records from then. And anyone who breaks a record would have had to do it in that same amount of games. You guys don't do that in any other era. No one goes back to the 90s or the 80s and says, oh, well, you guys had extra games, so I'm still counting the records from the 70s and 60s. You only do it to the athletes of today. So it's not just basketball where this happens. You know, same thing with Stephen A. talking about, well, there's no reason for the disrespect. That's my problem. There was no reason to disrespect the players of the 70s. Well, if I'm talking about how Steph Curry is one of the greatest point guards of all time, there's no reason to bring up John Stockton. There's no reason to bring up Bob Cousy. There's no reason to bring up Magic Johnson. Just acknowledge that he's one of the greatest, right? If we're appreciating LeBron's greatness, there's no reason to bring up Michael Jordan. There's no reason to bring up anyone else. Let's just appreciate LeBron's greatness. But why are we even bringing up anyone else? If I'm talking about how great of a season Saquon Barkley had, do we have a reason to bring up, well, Barry Sanders? Like, it gets ridiculous. Patrick Mahomes on pace, to probably win the most championships. As soon as Patrick Mahomes wins, here we go with Tom Brady talk. Here we go with Joe Montana talk. We spend no time appreciating the greatness of modern athletes. We spend most of our time finding a way to diminish them. And that's my whole point here. We spend way too much time finding a way to diminish modern athletes versus just giving them credit for the amazing things that they do on the field, on the ice, on the floor, whatever you want to call it, whatever surface that they're playing on. And this is a problem. And the fact that immediately when you talk about the Golden Boys from the 90s or you talk about the Golden Boys from the 80s or the 70s, people get so offended. It's disrespectful. Well, what do you think these players feel like? When every time they do anything, all you ever do is talk about how they couldn't play in another era. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Again, there's a time and a place to compare. But every single thing modern athletes do gets compared to older ones. And it's just ridiculous at this point. So I understand completely where he was coming from with that. Now, you know what? I might split this actually into 2 different videos. So I'm going to end this here. And I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to do a split into 2 different videos. And we're going to talk about the LeBron Stephen A. thing in the next video that's going to follow this. All right? We're going to just leave this video talking about how the hypocrisy when it comes to criticism across eras in sports. Either way, y'all, I'm Alex and I am out. Peace.